got a smart brain on you, this opportunity. I did make a suggestion that I would record the content part of today's presentation and then send you that recording to pop onto your server so that your staff can rewatch and rewatch. Is that okay with everybody? Any questions or interactions with the staff, I will edit out so that it's just the content flow that is left behind. All right, so let's crack on. If you do have a question, please pop your hand up. I'm new to this Google Meetings thing, so I'm not sure how that happens, but pop your cameras on, ask your question, or I will have a 30-minute Q&A at the end. We're going to chat for about 90 minutes, and then we're going to have the 30-minute Q&A. And so, yeah, so let me get going straight away. All right. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to have a look a little bit at some of the information. We're going to talk a little bit around losses, talk particularly how this affects you as a teaching staff. Then we're going to talk about adults in general, children, how it affects them, and then some healing ideas. So this is really about giving you information to put you in charge. So right now, I want to apologize to you because I have broken every single one of the rules of creating slide presentations. The slides are information heavy, and I'm not going to apologize for that. The reason they are information heavy and graphics not so good is because I'm going to be giving you these slides later. So I want to make sure that the information is on the slides that you can have it and refer to it. I'm doing presentations on Thursday and Friday again, so very early next week, I'm going to send you the presentation slides. I'm going to send you the recording so that you guys can have access to this going forward. All right, so let's understand, what is trauma? Well, trauma occurs where there's an incident or a series of incidents that affect your life in some way. Now, it could have been 20 years ago, it could have been 50 years ago, it could have been last week. Something has happened that is affecting your life now. And a trauma does not have to be what we traditionally consider life-threatening traumas. So the rapes, the hijackings, the carjackings, those kind of things are life-threatening. They are traumas for sure, but they are everyday traumas. And traumas can be as simple as you walked across the street and you nearly got knocked over, but you didn't, so you're fine. Or it could be somebody who has said something in such a way that it has deeply affected you and now it is limiting your life. Traditionally, that could be things like your parents, it could be things like your teachers and preachers who say things early on in your life that affects you for the rest of your life. A loss is when you had something and now you no longer have it. And then obviously a crisis is anything that causes uncertainty, distress, pain, or difficulty. More importantly, grief, which is as a result of all of those three, it is a process of loss and detachment. It is something that has been lost in some form, and you now have to come to terms with it. And so really and truly, the biggest thing around COVID is the grief. Not only are we dealing with the trauma and the loss that goes with COVID, and I'm going to unpack all of that shortly, but the net result of all of this is building up to grief. And so in effect, what we're feeling is a grief process. So it could be said that our nation is in mourning. Our nation is in mourning for, or in fact, the whole world, for a world we knew prior to COVID. And that is why it's so difficult for us. All right, so let's have a look. So the link between trauma and grief. Trauma leads into a loss of some kind, which leads into grief. So grief is a trauma, and trauma can trigger grief. Grief is an experience, trauma is an experience that encapsulates loss and grief. All right. So please, folks, if you do have any questions on this, you're welcome to ask me straight away. All right. Simultaneously loss and grief, simultaneous loss and grief can trigger trauma. So when we have the death and the loss that's happening right now, plus the trauma, plus the grief, the death, the trauma that's happening around COVID, and the losses. Now, the losses I'm going to talk about are not necessarily just death. It leads into grief. So what I really want to encourage you to do today is just to think a little bit differently. I want you to try and think of this whole process of loss and trauma differently. So let's understand what the effects of this pandemic are. Your lives, both professionally and personally, have been transformed. And I'm pretty sure that I can quite safely say they will never be the same again. We will never teach the way we taught before. It'll never be 100% the way it was. There's always going to be this lingering thing that COVID in our lives happened, and this constant awareness about what do we do, who we with, how to behave with other people, be with us forever. So your lives, the way you interact with the children, it's changed forever. I know that from a little bit of teaching background that I had, the one thing that I loved was actually just hugging the kids as they came to school in the morning. As they came through the door, give them a hug. I can't do that anymore. And we wonder when we will be able to do it again. At home, your home is no longer your home. Your home has become an office. So now you're scratching around. You've got your spouses, if you've got spouses, or family members, or the children. Everybody's at home. Everybody's trying to create safe space. We're all trying to find a little niche in the house that we can call a workspace. And yet so many of us are having to share workspaces. So bedrooms have become offices. It's kind of become okay in some worlds for people to be sitting on their bed and working and on a Zoom session. I mean, 2 years ago, who would have thought that we could be doing that? Your dining room has become a desk. Your lounge chair has become the place that you work. It's all kind of messed up. There's no necessary division now between home and work. We don't always leave home to go to work. We maybe leave the bedroom to go to the lounge, go from home to work. And it's all kind of distorted. New routines, everybody's got a new routine. You don't necessarily get up every morning and go to work anymore. New concepts. Who ever heard of masks and COVID and all of this stuff? Pandemics was a word we were not familiar with. Vaccinating the entire globe. New roles. Within the family are there are new roles. While mom and dad are trying to share workspace, the older kids are having to look after the younger kids and keep them quiet. Grannies who were looking after the kids have passed on, and now who's looking after the children while the parents are working? It's all kind of a mess. The uncertainty and the predictability of life, such as it was, it's no longer with us. All right. So the effects of the pandemic, not only are we feeling this pandemic at an individual, but we're feeling at a collective level. And we're getting to the point now where many elements of the population are saying, you know what, we're all in this together. Let's try and help. Yes, there are people who are standing back and saying, I don't believe a thing of this. I'm not going to partake in this, and that's fine. That's their decision. But increasingly, I'm finding that people are doing things to help and support those that are struggling. What will the cost of this be? I don't know. 5, 10 years from now, we're going to be looking back at this and we're going to have learned a lot of lessons, I reckon. But I don't know what the cost is going to be. What is the cost going to be from the global physical health? What will the lingering effects of this virus be? Strangely enough, I've just had somebody in my greater circle. The virus didn't manifest in their lungs or in the heart, which is where most of people are having a problem. It manifested in a disruption to the blood vessels in the lower leg, and this person has now had his leg amputated. how's that going to affect him going forward? Mental and cognitive health. I had a chat to a lady who had quite a bad experience with corona, and she was saying to me, Leslie, it's not the physical damage it's doing, it's the mental damage. I cannot tell you how many nights I went to bed praying that I would wake up in the morning because I was so ill that I thought I was going to die overnight, which is leaving an emotional toll, not only a physical toll. So our emotional health and safety is at risk. We don't know what it's going to be like. World financial system and the economy. Well, forget about the riots, but just have a look what has happened with the economy. We closed the economy down for a massive period of time last year, and the knock-on effect of that is that there are businesses that are going out of business hand over fist. There's no money around like there used to be. What are the impacts on the education system going forward? We don't know. Right now, we're still in a case of survival, but how is the education system going to be affected? We've got children who are going to be matriculating and moving into varsities. How is that going to be affected going forward? Well, the employment market is inundated right now because there are so many people that have lost their jobs. Our economy is shrinking, shrinking, shrinking. There are businesses that are going out of business. And so increasingly the unemployment rate is going to increase over the next short term. What is that going to do on the crime rate in this country? Fortunately, we have a country that is very good in its entrepreneurship, not always successful, but we have people who are willing to give it a chance. And that, in my opinion, is where the success of this economy is going to lie going forward. All right, so I want to just talk to you now very briefly about what actually has happened with grief. You can look at grief, and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in the late 60s came up with this concept that there are 5 stages of grief, that they don't run in a straight line. You don't go from denial into anger, into depression, into bargaining, into acceptance, because these things are the realities. If you look on the right-hand side, that is what it looks like. You're feeling all of these things at the same time. It's 3 steps forwards, 2 steps back. But it's a slow, progressive upward journey. So dealing with the trauma, dealing with the losses that we're all dealing with, and the resultant grief is not going to be an easy journey, folks. Coming out of the survival space that we're in right now, how's that going to affect us? We don't know. All we know is that we can do the very best that we can. And the reality is, if we hold ourselves stuck in one of those states, we're not going to progress through the other state. We're not going to come out in a really good mental health perspective. All right. So the thing with COVID is that COVID is unseen. This pandemic is unseen. Take the riots that we had earlier last week. We could see the devastation. If there's a flood, you can see the devastation. I saw yesterday pictures that a journalist friend of mine posted of Joburg burning at night. Horrible, horrible, horrible pictures. But you could see the damage and the devastation. And that's the problem with COVID. We cannot see the damage and devastation. For us looking in on somebody else's life, their life looks untouched. But we don't know what they're dealing with. Every day, we don't know what they're dealing with. So what are the long-term impacts? If you don't show an outward sign that you're not coping, everybody else is so busy with their own coping and their own survival, they're not going to see. So we have a bit of a dilemma. On the one hand, we have our individual losses and traumas and grief with COVID. 90% of people in some way now in this country have been affected by COVID. They've lost a close friend, they've lost a relative, somebody's been ill, they've been ill themselves and survived. But there's very few people who at an individual level are untouched by COVID. There's also at a national level. So not only are we dealing with our own people who are suffering, surviving COVID, the roller coaster of COVID is horrific for those of you who've had it. Today you feel fine and tomorrow you feel like you're dying. So at an individual level, you're trying to deal and process with your individual trauma and your individual loss and your individual grief. But we're also collectively trying to deal with this. So everybody is trying to deal with loss, trauma, and grief in some way or another. So the problem is that you don't, as human beings, we are meaning-making machines. Everything that happens to us needs a meaning. It's part of the way we are wired. Every external event, we give it a meaning so that we can file it in our memory boxes, either under good or under bad. Now, for some people, COVID, from a business perspective, has been amazing. But from a personal perspective, it's been horrific. As you know, we've lost in the last 18 months pretty much now 70,000 people. I think it was just over 67,000 yesterday when I looked. That's a lot of people to be losing in an 18-month period. So not only are we dealing with it as individuals, but we're dealing with it collectively. We are being shaped by the environment that we're in. And the children that are being raised right now are being shaped by this. Their future will be totally different. Communities, schools, and the staff, collectively, they too are feeling losses. They're feeling the losses of some of the children. They're feeling losses of their colleagues. They're feeling the losses of some of the parents. Not only are we feeling the physical losses, but don't forget there are also those emotional losses. There are losses of the loss of our independence, the loss of going where we want to go, who we want to socialize, and where we want to do, the loss of our private lives. Everybody is struggling with a new reality. It's hard to say how this is going to affect us in the future. All right. I want to talk now just for a little bit about the actual losses, and then we're going to move on. So as I mentioned, losses, they can either be seemingly small and inconsequential. All right. So what I'm saying by that, it could be somebody who said something to you, a teacher who says something to you when you're little that changes the entire way that you think about your life, a parent that says something. It could be the loss of your independence and your freedom. Freedom to go and have a haircut. I mean, for a while, we couldn't go and have haircuts. Freedom to move around. Or on the other extreme, it's the freedom of loss of life of our loved ones. A colleague of mine in 1 week with this COVID lost 10 people from their inner circle. That's just unheard of in living memory for most of the people that are alive today. So there are two kinds of losses. You get perceived losses and actual losses. So actual losses are tangible in the way that it could be a death, it could be loss of a job, could be a loss of your home, loss of your health. But then there are those ones that can't be seen, the perceived losses. And those are loss of your freedom, your loss of your feeling safeness has been gone, and for some people, permanent loss of health. There is a concept in the grief world of primary losses and secondary losses. So a primary loss would be, say for argument's sake, the loss of the head of the household. All right. Now the head of the household might be, and I'm just creating a stereotype here, but it's to get my point of understanding across to you. The head of the household could be the income earner. It's also the person who provides the financial security for the home, provides the discipline in the family. It could be the person who is, in fact, the breadwinner. When that person is no longer there, there's a lot of secondary losses that come into play. Because not only is there that void in the family now, because that person's presence is not there, there's a whole lot of secondary losses that fall in. Where's the money coming from? That person's no longer bringing home a paycheck every day. What happens to the house? How do we eat? How do we live? How do we pay the school fees? What's going to happen to our medical aid? Because now that person was employed, they had a medical aid. Now the medical aid is gone. How do we get medical treatment? How are we going to live in the long term? How do I buy clothes? How do I have money for self-care? We're now unsafe at home because now we can't afford to pay for the safety that we had before. The dynamics in the family shift, that the hierarchy and the roles in the family become different because maybe the spouse is now so in such grief that the older children are now running the house. Maybe they're lingering health problems. There's certainly no peace of mind at this point in time. Maybe the family has to break up and maybe they have to go and live with various different people. Things become very unpredictable. So what was a life of reasonable certainty has become a life of total uncertainty or unpredictability. Now, when you're used to having a life of certainty, having a life of unpredictability is really different, is really difficult. And that in and of itself is a massive secondary loss. It's another unseen loss. So here's another example I just wanted to give you. So let's say the father dies, the loss of the household, you're grieving that loss of that individual's presence in the household. Secondary losses would be the income threatened at home because now there's no money coming in, the safety, the medical issues, possible loss of the disciplinarian. The wife now doesn't have the support. So the wife now suddenly, after an extended period of time, becomes a single parent. How do you do that when you're still busy trying to grieve the loss of your life partner? Maybe the person who passed away was the only person who could drive. So how does everybody get around now? Maybe the situation was the loss of the father meant a connection to the father's family. Now that the father has passed away, what does that connection to that side of the family look like? Will that side of the family distance themselves from you and your family? And in certain traditions and in certain cultures, when the husband dies, the husband's family sweep in and take control, which totally disempowers the wife. In one of my grief courses that I do, there was a lady who came in and she was so angry because in her culture, when the husband dies, the husband's family come in and they help themselves to all of the husband's possessions. She was not allowed to keep a shirt. She was not allowed to keep anything for her children. All she wanted to do, and her children are relatively young. This happened a little earlier this year. Children are relatively young. They're kind of 5, 6, 7-ish. They were not allowed to keep a thing of their fathers. It was almost like the family swept in and removed every single memory of their father. All the photos, his entire wardrobe, everything that belonged to him, literally in a matter of hours, gone. And this was done 5 days after the death. So please don't underestimate the impact of secondary losses. They are often more traumatic than the primary losses. In the space that we're in, we don't have necessary time to deal with the loss of this loved one and then the loss of that loved one. As I mentioned, a colleague of mine, 10 losses in a week. And so what happens is we get the effect of these compounding losses that come around right smack bang one on top of the other. And no sooner have you tried to come to terms with the first one and the second one is there, and then the third one is there. So when you're dealing with one loss at a time, it's amazing because you can actually cope with the primary loss and any secondary losses. But when you're dealing with so many losses at a time, the body just doesn't have the resistance to deal with that. So there are a lot of knock-on implications of that. The first one is survivor guilt. And the survivor guilt sounds something like, oh, but if only it was me, if only I had died. You didn't. You're still here. But the guilt leads to stress and anxiety. And this stress and anxiety just keeps building and keeps building unless there's a healthy outlet for it. When so many people are dying around you, it's very likely that the attitude of who's next, when is it my turn, starts to come to the fore. And when that starts coming to the fore, again, that just builds on that lack of certainty and that high increased unpredictability, creating massive anxiety and stress. You don't have the time to get to resolutions of each one of these grieves. So what happens is that they kind of pile on top of each other. And in truth, you can't grieve them all together. You have to grieve each one at a time. So what happens is that grieving process becomes quite longer if it's not very carefully managed. Okay. In addition to that, the circumstances around the death play a huge role in the grieving process. For the first time in history, we are being regulated not to be at our loved ones' bedsides as they're passing. We can't get into the hospitals where our loved ones are dying. And so the folks that are dying, we don't get a chance to say goodbye. And so for us, there's a lot, for the survivors, there's a lot of guilt around that. Even though we have no choice. It's not our decision. We have no choice. But there's still that grief of, I wasn't there to say goodbye. I couldn't say goodbye. I have a client who, his wife, they're quite elderly. His wife and himself were in hospital together. And the hospital authorities thought it appropriate to put them into separate wards. It was 6 weeks after his wife's death that he was finally told that his wife had died. He is now out of hospital and recovering. But the guilt of not knowing that his wife of 47 years died and he knew nothing about it. He can't come to terms with it. Despite the fact that he himself was very, very ill, he can't come to terms that for that long he didn't know. So there's a lot of unresolved issues. There's a lot of unanswered questions. People are dying alone and there's no goodbyes. Disruptions of the mourning rituals. I mean, in normal times, we would have funerals, and then after the funeral, the family would all get together with friends and family and chat and just spend some time consoling each other. You can't do that now. So, how do we get over those normal emotional things that are happening? Probably the most important piece of information that I want to pass on to you today is that losses are not equal. The loss of a loved one is not the same as the loss of another loved one. There are two key things that play into this. Is number one, the relationship. How close were you to that person? And number two, how involved were they in your daily life? So if you think about this, if you've got a friend or a cousin who lives in Russia and you hardly know the person and that person dies, you're going to feel very sad for a moment or two. But if it's the loss of somebody who's in your home, who you have a really good relationship, somebody who's in your life every day, maybe they're not in your home, but maybe it's a friend or a parent that you pick up the phone and you phone every day or you message every day. It's part of your daily ritual to make contact with this person. And now they're no longer there. It's those voids that create the stronger impact. But still, no two relationships are the same. And therefore, the grieving is different for everyone. Okay, so collectively, some of the losses at schools is everybody's had to work out how to do things differently. None of the previous way of working works. So we're all in very short time frames having to pivot the way that we're working. I mean, for the longest time, many schools have had no children. I know of a school that has had no children in the classroom for 18 months. It's an interesting way to do education. I know that you guys are all on a break at the moment and you haven't got children in the classroom. But in the upper echelons of society where technology is affordable, we can still find a way to pivot. What happens in those schools where there is no technology? What happens in those schools where there isn't that kind of support to be able to pivot? I see somebody has raised a hand.
Hi, Leslie, it's Kamo.
Yeah, hi.
I think just on that point, because this is, a lot of people here from support staff, I think another example that just popped into my mind is that, the office has already changed.
Yeah,
Not being able to see all the staff members, at one place. That's also quite an example that we can relate to.
absolutely. I mean, you used to be able to get up and walk down a passage, and there down the passage was somebody that you could talk to. You can't do that anymore. It's now completely different. Things have to be done differently from the way they were being done. And it's tough, folks. It's really, really, really tough to know and understand. How do we cope with this now? Thank you so much for that. All right. So, where was I? So, that human interaction of being able to pop your head over a desk, can't do it now. It has to be very much planned, it's orchestrated. I'm going to give her a call. I must remember to phone Susan. I must remember and it becomes very much more deliberate. The current situation we're in also places additional burdens on the education sector. So despite the reducing resources, human and physical resources, there is additional burdens because now not only is the education sector having to be responsible for education, there's an increasing burden of responsibility on the education system to identify mental health issues. Sometimes the parents at home are so wrapped up in their own grief that they're not seeing that the children are struggling. So many times we ourselves are wrapped up in the grief that we're not seeing that we're struggling. Our colleagues can see that we're struggling, but we can't see it. And so the burden of identifying people that need help has shifted. It's not in the families right now. It's in the workplace and it's in the schools. One of the things I used to love about school was it was a place of safety and freedom. I don't know that the kids feel that about their schools now. They can't sit together in close-knit groups. They have to keep themselves apart. They have to understand the COVID rules. There is no freedom. In order to give everybody the space they need, how do they separate and keep everybody separate? Those logistics, don't know how that's going to affect us going forward. All right, let's talk particularly about teachers in the teaching world. And so for the support staff, a lot of this may not apply to you directly, but I want you to kind of understand some of this, because you're supporting the guys that are in the front line. And the more you can be aware of the challenges, the more you can empathize, the more you can help, and the more as a support group, you can get yourself into a place of empathy and support and understanding of what's going on in the front line. All right. So the approach to teaching has changed forever. I don't know that we'll ever go back to teaching the way that you did 2 years ago. I don't know whether the way you support the teachers going forward will be the same as the way you supported them 2 years ago. I think teachers are going to need support in a different way. And it's a case of what is that? Not just making sure that the mechanics of the business continues to run, but there's going to have to be a very much more humane support going on. So the safety of the learning environment has changed forever. It's going to take a long time for us to feel safe, and for our children and our educators and the staff in the schools to feel safe being back at school. Everybody would rather stay at home and get online and teach the children online. But that's not possible in all our spaces. There are many families who don't have the resources to invest in the technology. Understanding the predictability and unpredictability and how that is going to affect our performance of our children and our teachers, it's going to be huge. Because their teachers are trying to deliver an education, but at the same time, we're asking them to be alert of mental health issues. That creates additional burden of responsibility. Remember, at the same time, the teachers themselves are also trying to stay safe. So while we as human beings are created to be a species of collection and a species of community, we're being asked to survive and thrive in a community of isolation. It goes against everything. So the human contact with the children, can't happen. It's a bit difficult to see the emotions and the reactions of the children when their faces are covered with masks. You now only get to see this piece. So as humans, we are programmed to recognize changes in reactions by the changes in a person's face. If you can only see a third of their face, as people and as adults particularly, We have to learn to read reaction here when you can't see reaction here. How do we deal with new children that are coming into this world? The children that are coming from schools, other schools, I don't know whether children can transfer schools at the moment. But what about the beginning of the year? Those relationships that are formed right at the beginning of the year. In this circumstance, it's so difficult to create those relationships. You can't touch the children in any way, especially the younger ones. They want to be hugged. They want, their teachers are their idols, and they want to have the connection with them. Can't do it anymore. And so I wonder, going forward, this generation of children have lost their innocence. How do we cope with that going forward? There is an argument out in the world which talks to the apportionment of learning losses. So learning losses is the loss of the opportunities to create learning environments. And when we send our children home for a week or a month from school, never mind the curriculum that they're losing, what other learning losses are there? Sure that they're learning about life in a different way. Sure, they're learning that life can bring losses to them that they never expected. So what is happening right now in this pandemic environment is we are teaching and we're hoping that our children are learning in a state of survival. We as the adults in this world, we're living in a state of survival. We need to do what we need to do to make sure that we stay virus free. If we get ill, we have to recover. So the whole mental focus is around, we're just trying to survive every day. And as we're trying to survive every day, what is happening? We're now expected to learn. We're expected to teach. So when you look at the different ends of this spectrum, you've got the children who are hungry for knowledge and desperate to learn. You've got the teachers who are passionate about providing the quality education in a safe environment, which they're not anymore. And then we've got you folks, which are the support staff, which are doing everything that you can to support the teachers on the ground. So it becomes a new balancing act. The business priorities versus the human priorities. The business priorities of the academic production, the schooling, the assessments, the testing, getting done with the curriculum, getting the information through to the children that we need to give them. But at the same time, we're balancing this with a humanity aspect we never had to balance it with before. The supporting of the parents and the teachers and the children while dealing with our own loss, grief, and emotional journeys. Identification of critical people. Who are people that we identify who are struggling and that need help? It's easy to have a narrow focus on the academics and forget about the human side. But when we are in a space of survival, the one thing that we want to give the people around us is as much support, comfort, and safety as we can. So we have a couple of learning challenges. Now, the challenges in your space are probably not as significant because from what I hear, most of you are in a position that you can do your jobs at home. But for the folks that are in the classroom, everything's changed. So how do the teachers in the classroom create a nurturing environment when they themselves are in the throes of grief and loss and trauma? How do you come to work every day, uplifted, have a good spirit, enthusiastic, wanting to teach the children, and yet your heart is breaking? You're going through the depression that comes with grief. You're going through all that anxiety, all that anger. How do you walk into a classroom, put that down, and focus on the children? Historically, a teacher in a class of, say, 30 might have had one or two children who were struggling, but the majority of children were okay. Now, the majority of children are struggling, and it's only one or two that are okay. So the focus is different. Okay, I've already addressed that. Teachers have their own mental health and personal struggles, and yet they must support the children. They've got to walk into the classroom and put aside how they're feeling, what they're struggling with today, so that they can make the children the priority. We don't know what the long-term impact is going to be. We really don't. So as a result, there's going to be a huge need for mental health practitioners going forward. And I really want to encourage you folks, if you in your personal capacity are struggling, be it COVID related or not, the very best thing that you can do is make use of your wellness program. It's there. Get the support that you need so that you can support the people around you, so that you can support the teachers, so that you can support the children, and you can support the families. It radiates. If you are in the best place that you can be, despite what's going on in your world, the people around you will feel supported and loved. When those people feel supported and loved, they can radiate that through to the people around them. And so by you being strong as you can be given the circumstances that you're in, and if your mental health is good, you have a much bigger radiating ripple effect on the people around you. Don't try and be a hero. Get the help you need. Even if you suspect that you need help, ask for help. It's much better to ask for help and you don't need it than to be really needing help and not asking for it. So equip yourself with the warning signs, and we're going to go through some of that just now, and create new ways to have open environments where people can share. In a time of grief and suffering, the biggest thing is talking. The more you create environments where people can share what they're struggling with, the more they can talk about it freely and have no impact, and they know that what they say in that sharing circle doesn't go further, the more the mental health is stronger. If there's something very cathartic and healing about talking what your situation is, and we'll talk more about that. The old ways of sharing maybe don't work any longer, folks. We have to do this as a deliberate plan, deliberate strategy to support all the adults in this environment, the children and their families. So understand when to escalate grief and trauma to professionals. We'll talk about that a little later. We'll need innovation solutions where the older children can get involved. So I know that mainly we focused on junior school here, but there certainly are situations, even at home, where the older children can be involved in the solution making. Get them involved. When they're involved, it's the same process. When they're involved, they own the outcome. It's a good training for them for their adulthood. Let them be part of the solution. Let them be empowered. Open two-way conversations. I know time is of the premium, but it really doesn't take long to have a buddy system and everybody check in with everybody else on a daily basis. And then after a while, you turn the buddy system and you move on to a next buddy and you move on to a next buddy. Having a dedicated buddy system right now is hugely beneficial. And you can decide whether you want to partner up with somebody informally or kind of do it on a formal basis. Choose what works for you in your organization, given the nature of your staff. But please look at a buddy system. Look at having, it doesn't have to be a one-to-one buddy system. It can be one person who's in a group with like 4 or 5 other people. And then maybe you, after a period of time, you change the groups, or you keep the integrity of the group the same. But it really helps to make sure that there's somebody who's checking in on you. It gives you that sense of safety and security to know that somebody's going to check in on me today. It makes a massive difference. So we talked about the vulnerability and the strength a little bit earlier. Be vulnerable and say, you know what, I need help, guys. I'm struggling today. It's a huge strength to be able to turn around to say, folks, today I'm struggling. I need some help. Because tomorrow you'll be the one that's okay. And then you'll be able to help tomorrow. Take care of yourself and those and others that are around you, and plan for regular debriefing sessions. A debriefing session is not gathering together in a staff room or in a meeting room and talking and planning work. It's about debriefing. It's about debriefing about what is happening in your environment. Who are the people that are struggling in your environment? Who are those people that you think you should be referring on to getting mental health support? Mental health, folks, just as your body gets sick, there are times when you get sick from a mental point of view. Get the right help. Get the necessary treatments if you need treatment so that you can recover and get better. At these debriefings, talk about fear. When you talk about the things that you're scared of, what happens in the brain is that you actually disempower it. So talk about the fear. Staff cannot always solve the problems on their own. They also cannot be giving each other hugs. So that physical, tactile expression of support we can't do right now. So we have to find ways to show support in other ways. Be a little bit kinder. You don't know what people are struggling with. You don't know what they're dealing with at home. So please, I ask you, park your judgment. Don't judge the way people are reacting. Try rather and find out if they're okay and give them support. Manage your own support, manage your own emotional state. I learned a long time ago that children are a lot more resilient than we give them credit for. When you as an adult show a child that you are going through a tough time, Daddy's not doing very well today, but tomorrow I will be fine. What that does is it allows your children to show their emotions. It allows your children to own their emotions. Please, as adults, don't hide your emotions from your children. If you're feeling sad, say, I'm feeling sad right now. Let's go for a walk in the park. It gives the people around you, and it gives your children, more importantly, permission to own their own hurting. There is no one standard in dealing with trauma. But what really is important, that when you are helping children, be direct with them. If they ask you a question, be honest with them. Tell them what they've asked you. You don't have to tell them everything. Just answer their questions. If they want to know more, they will ask you. It's the only thing that I really want to encourage you. Don't try and give them the whole manual at the same time. Just answer the question that they're asking you. Depending on their age, they might ask more advanced questions. But if they don't understand something, they're feeling unsafe in that space. By answering the question they're asking you, brings them certainty and safety. So don't avoid their questions. Answer their questions. This applies at home as well. I just want to share a little bit of research that I came across just recently. They, in an article that was done regarding COVID in the US, obviously it may or may not be different here, but either way, the stats are a bit concerning. 15% of teachers are comfortable in providing trauma and grief support to children and others. 15%. That's a bit scary. For every 100 people who die, there are 100 to 125 children under the age of 19 Before COVID, 1 in 14 children had dealt with the death of a parent or a sibling by the age of 18. Coming out of COVID, it wouldn't surprise me if that is more sort of up at the 7 out of 14, the 50% rate. Students and teachers have never experienced grief. And I mean, for this matter, you, this is a support group as well. You've never probably had this many people in your environment that are going through grief. Normally it's 1 or 2 at a time. But right now, probably most of the people in some form are going through grief. Traumatic times are difficult for people. They don't feel comfortable, they avoid it. And it is a disservice to avoid the subject. Engage with the subject, open it up. The most important thing that you can do is acknowledge somebody's loss. People who have lost people, they want to talk to people. They want to know that it's okay to talk about their loved one. When people are in a loss situation, they want to talk about that loss, whatever it is. If you really want to help, be an ear that just listens. Don't try and fix it. Don't try and make it better. Just listen. Just be there. Let them talk. Okay. So often in a grief situation, as an outsider, we don't know how to react. We don't mention the grief because we're uncomfortable. We don't mention the situation, we're uncomfortable. We don't want the person to think about their loss. We don't want the person to think about it. And we think by doing that, we're helping them. You're not. You want to help them? Create a safe space for them to just share repeatedly over and over and over and over again, especially in the early days. The more that you talk about the loss, the easier it is to process because you process a little bit more every time. It's the best way to support people. Going back into the classroom and learning, just a couple of suggestions from my side, and they would apply equally to you guys going back into your office space. Set time together for debriefing groups. You've been away for each other now, I'm not quite sure, maybe 2 weeks or so. Set up time in small groups, maybe in teams or whatever it is, just to have a catch up. Have a cup of coffee, just catch up. How have you been the last 2 weeks? What's going on in your world? Just create that new connection. And encourage the teachers that you are working with to do the same thing. Let them create safe spaces within the classroom to actually let the children debrief. I will be sending you a nice little guide on just 1 or 2 things that you can check in with as adults and check in with as children. It's a really nice little debriefing kind of a session. Doesn't take long. Do it in smallish groups. Encourage people to talk, and it just starts bringing back that comfort, that support, that safe space. So I will send that to you guys um, with the slides and with the recording. Don't be scared to suggest to colleagues and to the parents of the children that maybe there's a mental health issue. At this time of our lives, mental health is much more important than ever before. All right. The effect of what is going on is huge. And so please don't underestimate it. Don't be frightened of saying to a colleague, listen, have you been to see your GP? I'm concerned about you. I'm worried about you. You seem to be in a dark space. Have you thought about maybe going to chat to your GP? When you're in that state of grief, when you're in that state of loss, you cannot see what outside people can see. So show love and support by saying to them, I see that you're struggling. Have you been to see a mental health professional? Can I help you to make an appointment with the wellness team? That's all you have to offer. You can't make them go, but you can maybe just start a different thinking process. Honor the staff and the children's loved ones that have passed away. Maybe create a memory wall or a memory board or something where for a short period of time you can honor those that have passed in this time. Maybe put their pictures up or put something significant up just in this time to honor the people that have passed. It's so important for people that their loved ones are recognized and not forgotten. It'll go a long way. Maybe have a discussion around the frontliners, the medical teams, the emergency response services, and create a bigger awareness around the fact that there are people who are putting their lives on the line for the safety of others. Let's just create that kind of gratitude and that perspective, because what it does do is it helps balance our lives, because our lives can be terribly small when our world is threatened. We tend to minimize our lives. So a gratitude practice is an amazing thing. Who are the people that you in your world that you're grateful for? And it's simple. I'm grateful for my colleague because they checked in on me this morning. I'm grateful for the fact that I've not yet had COVID. I'm grateful for the fact that I've recovered from COVID. I'm grateful for the fact that I can still work. Whatever you're grateful for, create an expression of gratitude during this time. It helps to keep the focus on a positive state of mind rather than moving the focus and keeping the focus on the loss and the grief and the uncertainty and the lack of safety. When you start focusing and you start balancing that out with a gratitude practice, somehow the mind automatically starts shifting to the positive side. And what I would call the distressing side becomes easier to cope with. Because instead of being 100% focused on the distressing side, there's a little bit of the gratitude and the positive that comes in to help balance that out. Okay, so let's have a look now from the children's perspective. And I'm not going to dwell too much on all of these because you're going to get these slides and you can have a look through these. So how do you help the children? First and foremost, make sure that you're okay. Prioritize yourself as much as you can. How do you support the teachers? By making sure you're okay. How do you support your colleagues? By making sure you're okay. Genuinely and authentically okay, not with a false facade that you're struggling and here you're bringing this sense of I'm okay to the world, but in the meantime, you're not. It needs to be genuine because people will see it very quickly. Make sure that you manage your burnout. Make sure that these stresses that you're under right now, the fact that you're coping with it differently, that you're trying to work from home, that you're trying to deal with all the stresses of the children at home because they're not at school and now you're trying to work, make sure you don't start heading down a road of burnout. Support the system by supporting yourself first. Make sure you're okay. If in doubt, check with the wellness team. Make an appointment. You've got nothing to lose. Be aware of your own traumas and secondary losses. Awareness is a huge healer. When you become aware of things, you can cope with them. Know your own signs of when you're getting anxious. Understand that when you get into a space of angry, why you're getting into the space of angry. Acknowledge where you are and ask for help. Okay, so this is just some common reactions that caregivers can do, can notice about themselves so that they can understand that they need help. I'm not going to go through them all, just going to pick one or two out of each second. When you are focusing on the crisis, when your mind keeps going back to the trauma, to the loss, to the grief, understand that you're not moving forward, you're not processing it. Please go and get something done about it. When your physical reactions change, you get very tired, lots of headaches. When your eating patterns change, when your sleeping change. If it lasts for long, and I'm saying now maybe 10 days to 2 weeks, get help. Emotional reactions, when your personality is, when the person that you are is different, you become increasingly irritated, you become angry, you start thinking about a dark world, please get help. Physical and emotional self-care, make sure you look after yourselves. I don't need to tell you how to do this. You know how to do this. Use the resources that are at your disposal. Your wellness program is an awesome program. Please use it. Don't try and be a hero. You may think you're being a hero for all, but in the long term, they're going to need to support you even more. Make sure that you're okay. Okay. Create a supportive environment around you if you can. So, okay. How do you make children feel safe? By being honest with them. By being honest with them in their frame of reference. Don't lie to them because they will catch you out. And once they catch you out, the trust is broken. So that's why I say answer what they need. Children want you to be honest with them. They want to know what the facts are. Obviously age related. Obviously, the older the child, the deeper you can go into the facts. Please don't say things like, oh, grandpa has gone on a holiday. If grandpa has passed away, in your own understanding and in their understanding, then make sure that grandpa, sorry, is not coming back again. They need to understand that. Otherwise, they'll be thinking, when's he coming back? When's he coming back? And I'm going to talk to you in a moment about how children grieve differently. Be part of the process. Get them involved in crafts. Get them involved in drawing pictures. Let them express their insecurities and their insafety. Talk about it. Write about it. Let them ask questions. Create a space where they can ask questions and answer just the question, nothing more. Some people need to process an event over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. That's okay. Especially children. The littler the children, they'll need to know this much information. And then they'll come back and they'll ask the next piece. When they're ready, they'll come back and ask the next piece. But create the space where they can ask questions. Okay, let me see there. Give the child time, let the event sink in. Find opportunities, make opportunities, maybe down around the dinner table. openly talk about what it is that they want to talk about. Also, what's important as an adult, be careful about what you're talking about, this virus. Be careful what the conversation they can be hearing. Be careful about what you're doing on social media. Be careful about the videos you're watching at home. The children are moving around in the background. This is in their environment. They're hearing it. If you are watching every possible nude broadcast on the TV, they're hearing it too. Okay? Be careful what is in your space. All right. So when is professional help needed? I think this is important. Again, I'm not going to go through all of this. I'm conscious of our time, but you can see when there is a change that has lasted for 2 weeks or more, go and check in with somebody. They can either say to you, no, you're good to go, or they can say to you, right, let's help. Either way, it's fine. So their behavioral science changes, mainly a change in behavior, a change in thinking pattern, a change in aggression. Please go and have that looked at. Emotional changes, we all have these, but if they're lasting for too long and you're not changing out of them, normally what will happen is you'll be okay, you'll get extremely angry, but you'll come back again. You'll be okay, you'll get extremely sad, but you'll come back again. If you're not coming back, please go and get help. So just from the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, I just wanted to show you, out of the people that reported anxiety, 46 were suffering from 46% were suffering from depression, 30% anxiety, and 12% were finally diagnosed as bipolar. The main challenges, they're all the ones that we've spoken about: anxiety, financial pressure, stress, family relationships under pressure, feeling of suicide, and a high increase in substance abuse. Women are twice more likely to suffer from depression than men. It is what it is, folks. It's the way we're wired. It's our hormones. If you feel that you're in a depressive state, please go and get it checked out. 20% of people are likely to suffer from depression at some point in their life. It's quite normal, folks. Depression is not something you have to label yourself with. Depression is something that you could be suffering for a short period of time, getting through a crisis, and you come out the other end. I know when my husband passed away, I was in a really bad state. I went and I got the mental health help I needed. Within 6 months later, I was able to pick up my life and continue walking. If I hadn't, I don't know how much longer it would have taken. The right mental health support helps you get through it faster and easier, in my opinion. Okay, so depression is entirely treatable, and 80 to 90% of people don't have long-term effects. So please get the help you need. All right, so this is basically just giving you details about some of the signs that you can see when there's a difference in the person, and it's been for a while. A happy, jovial, laughing, fun-cracking, joke-cracking person becomes very kind of somber. They become very quiet. They're not that same person. Just watch them for a while. If it's lasting 2 or more weeks, maybe suggest they go and make an appointment, because they can't see it. From the inside looking out, you can't see it. But from the outside looking in, you can see it. Okay, so let's talk just a little bit about the healing. Most children will manage with the right support and love and care from adults, but there are some that struggle, some that have severe anxiety, some that have depression, suicidal, pre-existing traumas, previous traumas that they have. If you see this lasting in a child, please take them for an assessment. I cannot begin to tell you. It's the one thing that you can do to be sure that your child is going to be okay, or that the child in the school classroom is going to be okay. There's a loss of communication. So when the children are not in a good space, they don't speak. Don't you as the adult ask questions. Please, please, please. When a child comes to you, would you recommend for, okay, I can come to that. Please, if a child does not want to talk, it probably means they're still processing. Just let them know. Firstly, answer the questions they've asked. Let them know that when they're ready to talk, that you are there for them. And just let them know repeatedly. I understand that you're struggling. I understand that you're struggling. Let me know when you're ready to talk. And it's the way you position it. Let me know when you are ready to talk. Okay? It gives them that independence. It gives them that control of knowing that they're okay. That you're not going to pressurize them. Because what will happen is the more you ask questions for something they're not ready to talk about, the more they go into resistance mode. The more they will tell you, I am fine, leave me alone, when they're not. But when you make it safe for them, they will come and talk to you when they're ready. At school, these are all the losses and experiences, the loss of the space in the classroom, the loss of the access to all of the things that they had before. So I'll leave that to you to read. In the family, it's the daily routines are so important. Folks, I cannot tell you, in this time of uncertainty, it is so important to create routine, create certainty, create predictability. Give something for people and the children to hang on to, and that's their routines. Inside of your home, you can create this safe space by creating security and certainty. Try and stick to not rigid routines, but in the morning, this is the routine that we follow. In the evening, this is the routine that we follow. Make sure that insofar as you can, create those safe routines. It doesn't help when now you're working from home and in a couple of weeks' time, you're going to be working back in the office again. But position that with the children. That's coming. It's going to happen. Remember what it was like before we were home? We're going to go back to that. It's all how do you position it with the children. Children grieve very differently to when an adult grieves. A child, the younger the child, the shorter the period of grief. So a young child, sort of 3, 4, 5 years old, will be playing outside. The next minute, they're rushing to you. Oh, I miss my daddy, or I miss my mommy, whoever the person is. They're in tears for a minute or two. And then the very next minute, they're outside playing again. They grieve in these very small pockets. Just let them know it's okay. The older the child, the longer that the pockets of grief happen. And I mean, as adults, we know what that feels like. So just support them in their grief. Don't negate the grief. Acknowledge it, respect it, and honor it. Children will share a little bit at a time, little bits of information, only as much as they want to share and only when they are ready. All you need to do is just acknowledge, thank them for sharing with you, thank them for trusting you and sharing with you. Don't ask for more details. If they want to give you more details, they will ask. Don't create the extra pressure of asking for more details. And just let them know that at any time they want to chat, you're there. Okay? Be a role model. As far as you can, stay calm. Be aware about what you speak about. If you've got adults at home, be aware of the conversations that you're having while the children are around. And don't think just because you're sitting on one side of the house, the kids are not there. Trust me, if they walk past and they hear something interesting, they're standing in the passage listening to your conversation. So be aware of what you're watching on TV. Be aware of what you're saying. Be aware of your cell phone conversations. Be aware of the videos that you're watching. They're in the background and the children are hearing it. Okay, they are sensing it. It's that uncertainty that is being built. What we need to do is try and create certainty in the areas that we can control. We can't control COVID. We can't control whether they're going to get infected or not, or whether we're going to get infected. But what we can control is the space at home. Let's keep that safe. Focus on the positive things that are happening around them. Spring is going to be coming. Focus on the garden, focus on the world, focus on the bits of normality that you can find in the world. I've spoken about the project. Create projects. If you have a family of that have been dramatically hit by COVID, create a memory wall. Honor and respect those people that have passed on. It helps the children to process. Okay, so there's a lot of that stuff. Be honest and accurate. Keep the explanations age appropriate. Stay connected to the school. In your spaces, obviously that's easy because you're in contact with the schools all day. But please, at your level of support, kind of do check-ins with the individuals in the schools. Let them know that they're supported. Let them know that you are there more now than ever before. Yeah, and then obviously for the children at home, just be the model of basic healthcare and hygiene. If you're telling them to wash their hands and sanitize, make sure that you're doing it. If you tell them to wear their mask, make sure that you're doing it. Don't tell them what to do and then do something else, because that just creates uncertainty again. Encourage the children to express their feelings in a creative way. Create moments of drawings. Ask them to draw their anxiety. Ask them to draw their fears. And again, just be direct and honest, and don't try and minimize COVID for them in their understanding. Don't dismiss it, because the conversations that they're having with their friends, and in some of their families, have been very badly hit. Your family might not be. And so there is a general feeling of unsafeness. I don't know if that's a word, unsafeness, lack of safety. A lot of this is just a repeat of what I've said. Again, acknowledge your feelings and say, you know what, I'm scared too, but we'll get through this together. If we all do the right things, we will get through this together. Encourage healthy and creative ways of coping. Allow the children the respect of appreciating their emotions, but also help them to get out their emotions. When you get them out, either verbally or in a creative space, you're helping for them to understand that their emotions are okay. It's safe for them to feel the emotions that they feel. And it's okay. Each child is going to deal with this trauma differently. Just respect that. No two children have the same information, the same experience. Just encourage them to share, allow them to grieve the way they want to do when they want to do. But if they're getting stuck in that grieving process, then take them. All you have to do is go to your doctor. Speak to a pediatrician. Just educate yourself. Okay. When children are stuck in that traumatic event, that's probably a time when they're completely going back to it over and over again. That's probably the time that you need to get themselves well. And as a group, find a way to de-stress. As a work group or as a family, find a way to de-stress. Particularly as a family, get in the car and go and do some physical activity together. All right? You can go to a park. The parks are open right now. Go and walk. Let them play on the jungle gyms. Sanitize them before and sanitize them afterwards, and let them get physical exercise. For children, keeping moving helps them to process. So help them with that. I'm not going to go through all of these. These are just kind of a summary of what we've already discussed. I've included preschoolers. They're the things that are the signs that they may be struggling. There's the junior school children, the adolescents, and there is just some other stuff that you can watch out for. It's the normal stress responses, difficulty eating, changes in eating patterns, changes in sleeping patterns, changes in behavior patterns that last. Okay, persistent sadness for 2 weeks or more. We've covered all of this stuff. I'm just repeating it here, repeating. just because it is important to be wearing of it. That again is just a repeat. You'll find that difficulty in concentrating for somebody who was good in concentrating before can also be a key trigger. So if you yourself are finding that you can't concentrate for as long as you used to, just ask yourself the question, am I struggling? If you are, you know where to get help. If you're not, maybe it's because the kids are making a whole heap of noise, or they're watching a movie that you really want to be watching and therefore you can't concentrate. Just understand it. All right. So, very briefly, if you can, find a way to debrief every day. Establish an attitude of gratitude. I've covered that already. Here is how you can help your children to rebuild trust. Now, this is a whole section. So, again, I'm not going through all the details of this, but here is the answer, Andrea, to some of your questions. Speak of the future, make plans, let them understand that there is a safety in the future that is coming. Rebuild trust and safety. Minimize the media exposure. I've spoken to that already. Engage the child. Keep talking to the child. Keep talking, keep talking, keep talking. It's them moving. When children are moving, even if they're miserable, you cannot be miserable and skipping or dancing or playing on a jungle gym. Doesn't work that way with children. So help them to get physical. Make sure that they're eating well. Make sure that you're eating well, that you're not pigging out on 27 boxes of chips every day. Look after your own diet. And in conclusion, be kind to yourself and others. You don't know what other people are dealing with. You don't know what other people are going through. So don't judge. Come from a place of kindness. Manage your own expectations. Do not try and be the superhero. Nobody's looking for a superhero right now. What people are looking for right now is honesty, vulnerability, and support. Check in regularly with the children, check in regularly with your colleagues, check in regularly with those in the schools. Make it personal. Maximize your wellness program. You have a wellness program, use it. I don't know what the rules of your wellness program are, but the fact that you have one, it's amazing. Use it. If you at all suspect that you need help, book an appointment. If you're too nervous to do it, ask somebody to book an appointment for you with the wellness people. Create an environment where adults and children are encouraged to speak freely, where they're encouraged to express their anxiety, where they're encouraged to understand it and give it a name. When it has a name and a personality, I know this sounds weird, guys, but trust me. When your anxiety has a name and a personality that is outside of you, it's a whole lot easier to deal with. So, as adults, every fear that we have boils down to one fear, and that's the fear of the unknown. If you can debunk that fear by creating a persona for that fear, whatever it is, now it's known, now it's no longer fearful. Familiarize yourself with all the warning signs that I've got in this presentation, and just be aware. Don't become hypervigilant, but just be aware. When your gut instinct says to you, somebody needs help, act on it. That's when you know. Express your concerns sooner rather than later. If somebody, one of your colleagues, is struggling and you're seeing that they're struggling, have an honest, courageous conversation with them. Say, listen, I think you're struggling a little bit. How can I help you? What can I do to support you? Can I get the wellness people to make contact with you? Be tolerant. Don't judge. People are making some really strange decisions at the moment. Talk to them about it, but don't judge. Because you're judging from your experience, not theirs. You don't understand everything about that's going on in their world.